Friends, Pastor Terry here. We are Okotoks Alliance Church, and this is the 10-Minute Coach. Let me take you into John chapter 12. We were there Sunday, April 14th, and this is that extraordinary text where Jesus finds himself back in Bethany near Jerusalem over the other side of the Mount of Olives, and he's with Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha, after he'd raised Lazarus from the dead. We talked a bit about the possibilities, like is a food they're eating, even food that had been gathered because there was going to be this wake, this grieving season, and here it's a meal of celebration. It says it's a meal that was given in honor of Jesus, and there's hard not to draw connections between the two, and yet it becomes a meal that's going to honor the fact that he will die. He's being prepared for burial, and we've talked about this extravagant worship that Mary brings to Jesus in breaking this alabaster jar of nard, pure nard. It's about a pound of liquid, almost 12 ounces, that she pours over Jesus. And maybe this is the first thing that I'll do is I'll take you to what's sometimes referred to as the synoptic problem. And the synoptic problem is what we describe it when there's a difference between what the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, what they say compared to what John says. Sometimes there's a variance within the synoptics, but most often it's a comparison because John is just a very different text. And so this is one of those examples where the synoptics say that Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper. But if you were just to read the Gospel of John, you would assume that this meal took place in Lazarus's home. And we say, well, how is that? What's up with that? And some people, of course, will say, oh, well, the Bible's unreliable, has contradictions. Well, there's no contradiction here at all. There are several possibilities, and we just don't know. We have to admit that we don't know. Number one, John does not say that it was in Martha's home. It just says Martha was serving. Secondly, we don't know who Simon the leper is. And a leper didn't normally live in a house. They were sent off to a leper colony. So did Lazarus take care of this? Is Simon Lazarus's father? There are a few possibilities, but again, we just don't know. So we don't have to declare it a contradiction because it's simply not. There's another apparent contradiction that we find a little bit later on, where it says that in verse 7, a woman, so she's unnamed in Matthew and Mark, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it upon his head as he reclined at the table. Matthew and Mark both talk about it being poured on his head, preparing his body for burial is the language that they use. But John emphasizes the fact that the feet were the focus of attention. Mary is kneeling at his feet, a posture of worship, literally washing or wiping his feet with her hair and this oil. There's a lot of perfume here. It would cover his entire body. The fragrance filled the entire house. This was extravagant, as I described in the message on April 15. And so there's no contradiction. It's just a different emphasis. It, in fact, I believe underscores the reliability of the independence of the gospel witnesses. That while Matthew, Mark, and Luke share some sources, possibly Matthew and Luke using Mark in large part and then adding to it, John is writing independently, and he has his own account and he has his own agenda that he's communicating. We've been talking about that as we've gone along, and now here's one that's kind of interesting in terms of the differences. John typically takes lots of time to recount what took place, far longer narrative sequences than what takes place in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. But in this case, the account, in particular, of the triumphal entry, which comes next, John's quite short compared to the other gospel writers, especially compared to Luke. And John is the one who puts them together in this sequence of personal worship and then corporate worship on the public, on the street, on the road leading from Bethany into Jerusalem. And before we leave the personal worship piece, I think we also need to ask this, though, and that is, to what extent are we supposed to look at what Mary has done here as an example? something that we are supposed to follow. And on the one hand, we have to say, look, it would be absurd. Number one, we don't have Jesus' feet to be able to kneel physically before and wipe them with perfume. Some of us don't have quite enough hair to make that look or be reasonable at all. So that's just contra and utterly literal, almost a ridiculously literal approach. But we also have to look at this and say, yet there is some expectation that she is modeling something extravagant that we are going to be called to in the sense of extravagance. Because after the triumphal entry segment, we get to the statement that comes John chapter 12, verse 19. The Pharisees are upset. They're looking at what's going on. They see this is getting us nowhere. Look, the whole world has gone after him. Well, they've said more than they know. And it's immediately following that John records the fact that now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. And we say, okay, well, this seems to be the trigger for Jesus to say, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. So this is the great divide. Everything from chapter 12 and following is going to be leading through this Passover celebration, the 6 days that lead up to his death, burial, and then his resurrection. And we also need to recognize that what Jesus says next is connected, it's threaded to these acts of worship that were before. He says, very truly, verse 24, very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. Okay, fair enough. He's talking about himself there. That's Jesus saying that being glorified is necessary. He has to drink the cup the Father is given to him. It's language he's going to use a little bit later on when he gets to the Garden of Gethsemane. But we read on. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. And we say, well, what's that? Who's that? What's that referring to? If the one seed is Jesus, are the many seeds not you and I? It's talking about the fruit of what would take place as a result of his sacrifice, and that's you and I. That's the many followers of Jesus. But then he goes on and he says, anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. Jesus will say things like, a servant is not above their master. They mistreated and abused me. They will do the same to you. These pieces all fit together in the context of personal worship, corporate worship, and then this expectation that this is going to cost us our lives. Unless a seed dies, is buried. It's going to cost us our lives. Paul will write in Romans chapter 12, therefore, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto him. This is your reasonable act of worship, I think is how the NASB words it. It's your reasonable act of worship. In view of God's mercy, that therefore is a huge therefore. It refers to the 11 chapters that have preceded chapter 12, where Paul's built a case and said, look, these are the extraordinary things that God has done for you. You need to respond to this. He walks through these amazing gifts of grace and then says, therefore. The only reasonable thing you can do is offer him your life in response. Now, he will give it back to you in the fullness. The promise is an abundance of life, a fullness of life, streams of living water flowing from your innermost being. We've been reading in the Gospel of John. He's the bread of life. He is the light of life. Whoever walks with him will never walk in darkness. This is what you get in return. But the life of a disciple is an act of worship which requires everything. And we say, yeah, that's extravagant. That's extravagant. And this is the context that is set up for us here. And we say, I am no longer just a musician. I am a musician who's a Christian. Maybe we could say a Christian musician. We'll think about that. I'm no longer just a plumber. I'm a Christian plumber. Or I'm a plumber who's a Christian. It changes my vocation because it changes who ultimately I answer to. I'm not just a teacher, I'm a Christian teacher. I'm a Christian worship leader. I answer to the Most High God, and I will stand before Him one day accountable for what I've done, what I've taught, how I've led. And so, to the best of my ability, I attempt to be earnest in thoroughly preparing, and I get it wrong sometimes because I'm human. You will get it wrong sometimes too. You're no longer just a carpenter. You're no longer just a dancer. You're no longer, and I say just, I don't mean to minimize. What I mean is that you live out your vocation in light of who Jesus is, because He's called you to represent Him everywhere that you are. Your life is His. This is our reasonable act of worship. This is our extravagance to Him. Let you think about those things. Go through the questions on the sermon notes, on the questions on the back of the sermon notes. I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Okotoks Alliance Church, and this has been the 10-Minute Coach. Bless you, and bye for now.